Hi there. My name is Andrew Henderson. I'm the deputy audience editor here at the Lexington Herald-Leader. I'm joined today by someone who needs no introduction, but I am legally required to give them one. Janet Patton, our bourbon reporter here at the Herald-Leader. Janet, how are you doing today?
Great. How about you, Andrew?
I am doing swell. We are here today to talk about something that is very familiar to Janet, perhaps to many Kentuckians, and of course, that is bourbon. And more specifically, what is happening in the bourbon industry right now? It's been a bit of a tumultuous year. There have been declining profits. Layoffs, tariffs, of course, abounding in the background of all of this. So, Janet, I want to start off with a perhaps a general question for folks watching. Is that how exactly how big is the bourbon industry here in Kentucky? I think it's rather ubiquitous with the state, but I mean, on what kind of scale are we talking?
Well, the bourbon industry claims to be a 9 billion with a B dollar industry, and I don't disbelieve that. I think they are pretty big. There are more distilleries now than you can shake a stick at. There are distilleries in Lexington. There are distilleries in Louisville. There are distilleries in Bardstown. There are distilleries all over the state in little tiny pockets that you probably didn't even know had distilleries. Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, and there are, warehouses everywhere. If you're driving around, you'll see them and you'll think, I didn't know that was there. Maybe it wasn't there before. Now it is. There are a lot of people that work in the bourbon industry in Kentucky these days, thousands and thousands of jobs. So I think maybe people in Kentucky are kind of aware of it. Like you said, it's just sort of ubiquitous to us, but we don't realize what a big financial and economic engine it has become between the industry itself, making and selling bourbon, and tourism, which is also huge. People, who come here for things like the Kentucky Bourbon Trail or just last weekend was the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. September is Kentucky Bourbon Month, so there'll be stuff all month long somewhere that you can stumble into. Even if you didn't plan it, you'll come across something.
Right. I think that is something that many people here in the state can agree with. It's you can if you throw a rock, you'll hit a distillery, just about. And I think that does touch on one of the big questions that I wanted to ask you here today, before we get into some of the more sort of like the financial side of things. Is that you know as you've said, we've got distilleries popping up left and right. There was a good long time there where it seemed like getting in on bourbon was like that was a really big ticket. Like, that was a way that you could make like a pretty good profit. And now, as your reporting has bore out the last few months, we've got distilleries that are declaring bankruptcy, distilleries that are facing liens, that are closing before they open, or in a personal favorite of mine, asking the court if they can use whiskey to pay off their debts, which I think is very Kentucky. Um, very much. I feel like that harkens back to an older time where perhaps that was something that was more more easily done, to do that. Um, have we gotten to a point in this state where the supply of the bourbon, like all of the supply of bourbon, the distilleries, more and more of them, have we gotten to a point where that is outpacing the demand that people have for it?
Well, I think the short answer is yes. The industry kind of went through a big boom. We threw up so many new distilleries. The existing distilleries have added so much new capacity. More stills, so they've doubled capacity in tripled in some cases, and then built, more warehouses. So they're aging more whiskey all over the state. And that was going great for a long time, with no sign of outpacing demand. They were just, kind of keeping pace with it. Then COVID hit. And during the shutdown, when people couldn't really go anywhere, a lot of people are kind of stuck at home, they drank more. Demand increased by a lot. And so distillers thought, we need to make even more. So there was this period of time, in about 2020, when demand went up really sharply. And so distilleries who are already, basically 24/7 just poured it on. And then after we came back, demand started to go back down. So if you look at what it was in like 2021, demand is down quite a bit. If you look at where it was before the pandemic, it's actually sort of now back to that more level trajectory. So yeah, there is a glut, a bubble there that will need to sort of flatten back out. And the trick for bourbon will be to match the regular growth trajectory, which I think they can do quite easily. The big companies, Beam, Brown-Forman, Heaven Hill, those can absorb this kind of ups and downs pretty easy. A Diageo, yeah, they can work it out. That $1 million is a rounding error to them. But if you're a small startup, then it's really easy to get into a position where you are robbing Peter to pay Paul, and that's when you start getting into the financial troubles that we have seen with some of these distillers, where now, the bank that was quite eager to finance this startup, when it looked like it was a surefire, deal they could not lose money on, has changed the rules. For some distillers, they used the barrels as collateral. That's kind of deep in the weeds, but I think this is part of the problem that has happened to some of these. And as as the glut came, onto the market, the value of the barrels went down. And so the bank said, when we loaned you that money, it's just like when you have a house. When we loaned you that money, we required you to have X amount of collateral. Well, now you are upside down on your loan because the value of the collateral has gone down. So you need to give us either more money or more collateral. And for a lot of people, that meant the only way to even out is to sell off something if you could. That further, fuels the excess supply, and the cycle just kind of keeps repeating. And you get to a point where you can't really sell off anything more. And so then you're in bankruptcy, or you're closing your distillery, or what have you.
Right. And so from what you're saying, the numbers definitely bear that out as well. Like 2020, huge increase. People were drinking. These companies, they're like, we need to, let's go all in, let's ramp it up. And so it sounds like some of these smaller distillers were also trying to get in on the game, but now it's like, now it's kind of gone back down from that bubble that was created for the high demand. And now they're kind of the ones that are taking the hit on the chin, more or less.
Basically, yeah, that's exactly what's happened. So, if you were, it just kind of depends on the business model that you have. So a lot of brands come into the market. There's two ways to come into the market. There's the slow way, and then there's the fast way. The slow way is build a distillery, start making, distillate, putting it in barrels, wait several years for it to, turn into something you can drink, and then start selling it. That's the slow way. I mean, that works. That totally works. You can do that if you know what you're doing and if you're really good at it. As you begin making, the spirit, you sell some of it to somebody else and you keep some of it for yourself. I mean, you don't have to keep some of it for yourself. You can sell all of it. You can be a contract distillery.
Mhm.
Also a very popular business model. Or you can go the quick route, and that involves buying something somebody else already made, preferably something somebody else already aged.
Mhm.
And a lot of people may not realize that you can go to a broker and say, "Hey, I want to launch a whiskey brand. How can I get a Janet Patton bourbon out?" It's really pretty easy. We could launch one. You and I could probably get a brand, to market
Yeah.
within 6 months, maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of paperwork than you think, but
We're launching it right now, actually, now that
sure, sure. I
this
don't
is
know
the
what we're going to call it, but we'll
yeah,
do it.
this is the
So
springboard.
we're just spitballing here. We go
Yeah.
out, we find the broker, we buy some bourbon, we taste the bourbon. See, this is really good stuff. Let's take this. And we find someone to bottle it for us. A lot of independent bottlers. We have to pick out a bottle, we pick out a label, we pick out a name. We take all of this through the paperwork, like the TTB or whatever, and then you get it on the shelf and you just start marketing it with whatever idea you have to market it. Sometimes it's a gimmick, sometimes it's a personality. Like you partner with an athlete is very popular.
Mhm.
So, or musician, even more
Mhm.
popular. Partner with a rock star, partner with a country star. I mean, you see this. You know that. Okay, we'll just throw one out there. What's the one that's with Buffalo Trace? Chris Stapleton. Chris Stapleton did not make this bourbon. He just went. He partnered with Buffalo Trace. I'm sure he'll pick it out because that's the fun part, right? But
Yeah.
he didn't make it. So Buffalo Trace made it. They put his name on the bottle and they sell it. Not that they needed any help selling bourbon, but it's a
Right.
pretty proven business model. And then you have something on the market, you price it for more than what it costs you to get into business, and then you start raking in the dough. And you can do that, and then take the money that you make, and then you start making a distillery. So these are business models that have been around for a long time. Um, and I think that what happens is a lot of times they just get sort of behind in things. But either
Mhm.
one's a completely valid way to do it as long as you know what you're doing financially, and as long as you know what you're doing when it comes to picking out a good bourbon, picking out a good something people are going to want to buy and drink.
Right. And speaking of some of the financial decisions of the industry, to use that as a sort of springboard here, I'll take it. I want to take us back to a time, an ill-forgotten time of earlier in 2025. If people can recall back that far, we started off the year. Uh, President Donald Trump was talking about tariffs. He's still talking about tariffs, but at the beginning of the year, there was a possibility of a 50% tariff on American whiskey by the European Union. In March, he implemented a 25% tariff on Canada, and last month, a 35% tariff on Canadian goods went into effect. So how do these tariffs affect bourbon here in Kentucky? And I think also as part of this, like how much does the industry here in the state rely on exports to other countries?
All right. So right now, I don't think that maybe any of those tariffs are actually in place on bourbon. The EU one has been kind of held in abeyance, waiting to see if they can work things out. If they can't, then it could come into play. Even the one with Canada, I think right now bourbon is considered to be falling under the previous trade agreement worked out during the first Trump administration. So I think right now, despite the sort of ever-present threat of higher tariffs, I don't think any of them are. I'm sorry. I thought I had my phone muted. Beg your pardon. Let me turn this off. Okay. I don't think that any of them are actually in place right at this moment. But that doesn't mean that they haven't had an impact, because they have. Mm-hmm. So in some cases, just the threat was enough to have an impact. So take Suntory, which is Beam and also owns Maker's Mark. They discussed publicly that what they had done in the past was to move a lot of stock overseas. So normally, you kind of, it's like what everybody does with Amazon, what Walmart does with its goods. You need it today, you order it, and it comes when you need it. Mm-hmm. What they were doing was pre-purchasing and moving everything to the market they were going to sell it into, so that they didn't have to pay a tariff in the future. They thought, okay, if we're looking at a 30% tariff, we're going to have to move it overseas now. So that's one thing. Businesses started taking steps like that to offset. And I think those were probably smart business moves. Meanwhile, President Trump's statements really upset a lot of people. The statements that he made about Canada really, really upset a lot of people in Canada, about making it the 51st state, about annexing it, about just, they view that as a threat against their sovereignty. So in March, most of Canada took all of the American whiskey products off the shelves and out of bars. So you haven't been able to walk into a bar in most of Canada since March and get a Maker's, or get a pour of Woodford Reserve. They're just not selling it by choice. It's their boycott, and I think only 2 provinces have relaxed that boycott. Most of them have maintained it, I think, even now, which, by the way, is costing them a lot of money. I mean, we haven't really talked about the piece of that puzzle, but they're doing this by choice. It's costing them tax revenue, but they mean it. So they're keeping these products off the shelves. And that has cost Kentucky Bourbon millions. So as of June, it was like $19 million. And it's, still going up. So Brown-Forman had said that just that boycott has cost them, what did they say, 60% of sales? It's really had a serious impact. And I think other companies are seeing similar impacts. Bourbon and American whiskey exports are down 55 to 65% to Canada so far this year.
Right. And obviously, as you said, even, and I think this, is also due to the ever-changing landscape of these tariffs, as to when they're implemented, what do they affect? What don't they affect? How much is it? Quite obviously the threat alone has been enough to impact the industry in a way that, even if it's not on paper, being tariffed necessarily, like, that's clearly enough to get some of these big names, like Brown-Forman, a little bit hesitant, taking the hit there. And I did want to take a second, with mentioning Brown-Forman, because I think that is a brand that is rather well known here in Kentucky, especially with some of some of the brands under them. Woodford Reserve, of course, being a particularly well known and popular one here. We started the year with Brown-Forman saying that it was going to lay off, I think, 12% of its workforce, close the cooperage in Louisville, which had been in operation for 80 years. And like you just mentioned, just last month they reported seeing a continuing decline in sales. When you kind of start off the year like that with one of the big names in the industry, did that set off any sort of like alarm bells that like, oh, things might be about to take a turn here?
Yeah, I think so. I think it did. I think that people had sort of been watching in the background this, is there a whiskey glut kind of thing going on, and are we going to get hit with tariffs, those kinds of things. But when Brown-Forman said, yeah, we're going to have to lay off a lot of people, I think it really kind of sent a chill through things. The industry, you had asked me earlier if they, how important are exports, and that varies by company. But for Brown-Forman, they're very important. So some whiskey companies export a lot. Brown-Forman is one of those. Jack Daniels, which they make in Tennessee, not in Kentucky. Isn't it a bourbon? We can have that discussion another time. But let's just call it an American whiskey, and it is one of the best-selling, if not the best-selling American whiskey brand in the world. So huge profile worldwide, all over the globe. They know Jack Daniels, even if they don't drink it. And suddenly, Jack Daniels had been for decades this brand that was just bulletproof. And suddenly it stopped growing. And that just has shaken, I think, a lot of people, and certainly in Brown-Forman, I'm sure. So that's a big deal. Yeah, I think it was sort of unexpected. Their stock has fallen a lot this year. I've seen some analysts say, maybe now it's a good buying opportunity. I'm not a stock market analyst. I'm not going to advise on any of that stuff. I think that Jack Daniels as a brand has so much residual value. I think it'll come back. And they have a lot of great strategies that they're playing out to try to, boost the sales. I think some of them are probably pretty smart. We can talk about Bourbon and Beyond a little bit here if you want to. So, Jack Daniels has always been kind of associated with music and rock and roll and that kind of thing. And now country music a lot because of, think of like the Shabuzi song that it's really famous for that right now. They are really amping that up with playing into that market even more with concerts, with promotions, and they've been at Bourbon and Beyond. They're going to be at Bourbon and Beyond. Their footprint's going to be bigger than ever. So you'll be able to walk around this big music festival in Louisville this weekend and see two Jack Daniels experiences. One's a sports bar where you can just kind of go in and chill and watch the game or whatever if you've had, if you're between artists. The other one is, just a Jack Daniels experience. You can go in and taste things. It's also going to be in the various other bars scattered around. And one of the things they will have there is their new Jack Daniels Blackberry, which they launched just this summer. So they're trying a lot of new things to reach new customers, new younger consumers who have enough money to buy expensive booze and to sort of make a positive association. You're here, you're having a great time. This is really fun, right? You're going to remember this great drink that you had while you're having a lot of fun. So now you want to go home. Remember that great time we had? Yeah. Oh, we should do that again. Yeah, make that cocktail again. So that's kind of what they hope will happen, I think, in their heart of hearts.
Right. And I think that does tie in, of course, to, I believe, a story you just had this morning about how the industry is trying to appeal to a younger crowd, and that does also relate to a bit about a question we got from a reader here, Tiffany, who asks, with bourbon attracting newer and younger customers, the industry has emphasized education, moderation, and choice. Is that the kind of forward-looking responsibility that will keep bourbon strong for decades to come? So do you see, Janet, like a change in how bourbon is specifically being sort of targeted to a younger crowd? Like, is that part of the strategy they have here to get more young people on board with that?
Yeah, it is. I think it's quite deliberate, and I think it's probably pretty smart. So they have a lot of data that shows that younger people are not drinking at the rate that previous cohorts did. So even, we've known for a long time that pretty much, as you get older, you drink more and you drink more expensive stuff. But even looking at, when I was younger, when I was in my 20s and 30s, people who are in their 20s and 30s don't drink as much now as I did then. So the industry has had a big debate about why. Is it because of, younger people are more interested in being a healthy lifestyle? Maybe, but I think there's a lot more data, newer data, that shows they just don't have the money to spend on stuff. Some of it is, though, a deliberate choice at sobriety. So you see a lot of industry people talking about what they call zebra striping. I don't know if you've heard this term, what they call zebra striping. When you go into a social drinking occasion and you will drink, one drink will be alcoholic, but the next drink will not be alcoholic. And then you switch back. So you're getting less drunk over time. You're not, that's what they call zebra striping. One alcoholic, one non-alcoholic. You just, alternate, like white, black, white, black, white.
I see.
Zebra striping.
I was wondering about the name, and I see now.
Yeah. So there's that. They have emphasized for a long time quality over quantity. And part of that is trying to push drinkers toward premiumization, more expensive products. So they would much rather have you drink a cocktail with Woodford Reserve or Old Forester or even a premium Jack Daniels product than just, their bottom shelf Jack Daniels. If they could get you there, that's their choice. But having, they know that a lot of people can't get there yet. So they're coming up with alternatives. And one of the areas that they've seen growth in, and I think this is really interesting, is RTD. RTDs are ready to drink cocktails. Those are cocktails that come in cans. So I know a lot of people are familiar with things like White Claw or some of the other canned drinks, other, hard seltzers. Those have been hugely popular in recent years. And this is an effort to kind of play into that space. So their alcohol, their bourbon or tequila based drinks in a can. And that's something that they've had a lot of growth with in younger consumers, which I think is really interesting because they're sort of hitting that sweet spot of wanting you to drink something that's a little bit better than a beer or a White Claw, but is still somewhat moderating your drinking and is less expensive.
Yeah. Do you think, like, especially as you explained with the zebra striping, like, do you see any incentive for these brands to like come out with a non-alcoholic sort of like spirit or cocktail that you've described? Like, is there any, would they have anything to gain from that?
I don't think they would have anything to lose by it. I don't think they would come out with one on their own. I think they would be more likely to partner with somebody who is already doing it. Okay. And because you don't want to have to reinvent Coke. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I think they would be more likely to partner with somebody in into some kind of space like that. And the RTDs are a little bit like that. Like there literally is in some places. I don't think we have it in this country anymore. Jack and Coke in a can.
Mm-hmm. a simpler time. Uh, now, Janet, some of the things you've also touched on here with like um, people, like the financial sort of port of entry for bourbon is not it's not nothing, that's for sure. Some of these brands are rather pricey. Um, so with that in mind, are there other factors at play for what may be driving people to drink less? And also in tandem with that, and this is one of our reader questions from Hank, who wants to know if cannabis has had any effect on the bourbon industry. So yeah, what's kind of driving a decline in people drinking?
Well, I think that's a great question. It cannabis has been mentioned, and I think that the industry is watching it really closely. Um, I don't think in general that they feel hugely threatened by it yet, um, but they are aware of it. They don't like it. They especially don't like cannabis based drinks. So I think that it may not have, they may not always say it publicly, but behind the scenes, I think they've lobbied against things like, the hemp drinks that do have some level of THC in them.
Right. I think that
Um,
just happened here for us just this past legislative session where the
yeah,
where state lawmakers banned the sale of THC infused drinks. And so is perhaps there were perhaps some lobbying there behind the
oh
scenes.
yeah, oh yeah. I don't think they like it because that's they don't have a problem with you getting intoxicated. They just don't want you doing it with hemp. They want you doing it with alcohol. So, and I don't think, I could be wrong, but right now I don't see a big market for a drink that has both. For some reason, people feel like an alcoholic drink with THC is a step too far in that food chain. Um, Maybe it is. Maybe that's just in some people's minds that's too close to abuse, drug abuse or something. I'm not
There's only
sure.
one way to find out, I think, is
So I don't. They've cited it. They oppose it in general. It has been mentioned as a market threat, but I don't think there's a lot of data showing that it is a big market threat. In part because while the cannabis products themselves are big, the drinks are not that big yet. So if they get bigger, yeah, I think that the industry, you know, will they decide to either go all in on opposing it, or will they turn and say, well, if you like it so much and we partner with you, maybe. I kind of feel like that's not the way they'll drift, though. Um, I think cannabis is an issue for the industry because they can't control it, if that makes sense. And it's still, for the stock market, in a lot of ways, a more risky bet. So the industry feels safer opposing it, I think. I don't know
yeah,
how much of a real market impact they see it. People
yeah,
consume a lot of cannabis gummies and powders and stuff these
right,
days. So it's definitely huge. But
yeah. And I could see, especially just from sort of that market perspective of being like, well, the legality of some of these products is still like varies state to state.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
even here in Kentucky, where we just have a sort of fledgling medical, marijuana, program, which is not not explicitly the same as THC, but it just, I think, goes to show that like it's still such a perhaps an unknown factor for the bourbon industry, where it sounds like they're keeping an eye out, but it's still kind of like it's developing in a lot of ways.
yeah. It's just kind of messy, and that messy is risky. So they're not going to jump into risk they don't have to, I think.
Right. Um, I think this also ties into a question we have. Actually, I have two questions sort of along the same lines. One from a Clayton and a Jordan, which kind of asks about um, how state lawmakers can how can they support bourbon? How do they support bourbon? Which I think is in quite a number of myriad ways, through either the use of like tax incentives, tax breaks, things like that. I mean, just based on your number of years on this beat, Janet, like what are some of the things that you've seen that the state has gone out of its way to do to sort of support the bourbon industry?
Well, the state has done a lot, and a lot of the things that the state has done have, in fact, been a part of fueling the growth we're seeing right now, or we had been seeing until fairly recently, and even ongoing, because ship doesn't stop on a dime. This is very much like it's still got a lot of forward momentum. It's just they've kind of cut the engines for now, I think would be the way to think of it. Lawmakers in Frankfort, in Kentucky, have been hugely supportive of bourbon, um, in so many ways. So they, for instance, have allowed distilleries to open up tasting rooms. They didn't used to be able to have pours. If you went to visit a distillery, you couldn't even be sure you were going to get to taste it. And now you can. Um, and then they said, well, if we can serve a pour, could we serve a cocktail? And now you can. You didn't used to be able to get an actual cocktail. Now they've said, well, if we can do it at the distillery, could we do it not at the distillery? And Frankfurt said, yeah, we could let you do that. So now you'll see things like brands that have their distillery maybe way out in nowhere with a hard drive from Louisville or Lexington, say, but we'll put a tasting room right in downtown Louisville.
Mm.
And then we can get customers who will come in, who will sort of become familiar with the brand, taste our products. Maybe they'll want to go visit the distillery. Maybe they won't, but at least we'll still be able to interact directly with the customers that way.
Right.
So
It's very. It sounds very much like a if you give a mouse a cookie scenario.
it's
Where
exactly, and they have given them a whole cake. It's so
yes,
incredible.
yeah,
Yeah, the economic incentives have been huge.
yeah.
And
Tourism, of course, a huge part of it.
oh,
The Kentucky Bourbon Trail. The private industries that have cropped up with like if you pay us, hundreds of dollars, we'll get you on a bus, we'll take you to these distilleries. Like that's and all of
yeah.
that, of course, is because state lawmakers have made these incentives for the industry to get more people here, to get more people drinking.
Yeah, they didn't used to have, I remember when the first sort of gift shops, visitor centers opened at distilleries, and it was pretty perfunctory. The very first ones couldn't even really sell alcohol. They were just like merch. But then they said, well, can we sell a bottle, a sealed bottle? And yes. And now, of course, if you go to these distilleries, it's very elaborate. You can do any number of tours. Many of them you have to book well in advance. You can eat at a restaurant. We just had a story by a freelancer about some of the restaurants that have cropped up that are just fabulous at these distilleries. Much of this has been financed through rebates on the barrel tax. So the distillers hated forever that they had to pay taxes on barrels of whiskey as they aged. They said, no one else has to do this. We shouldn't have to do this. So Frankfurt finally, a couple of years ago, said, okay, we'll start sunsetting that. And one reason they did that was because they had already given them the option of clawing back money that they paid in taxes, for capital improvements. And so they said, we can't get back all we're paying. We are building so much stuff and it's still not enough. So they said, fine, we'll come up with a whole different way for you to get your money back. So I mean, that clawback of money from the barrel tax is kind of what lit the fire under a lot of the building boom. So suddenly they had free money, basically their own money back, that they could use. Tax money that had been coming to taxpayers was going back to the distillers to, build the new stills, build the new rick houses, build the tourism centers. And by the way, if you wanted a separate tax for, a separate tax incentive for a commercial for a little film for your distillery or your visitor center, they've done that as well. So when I say they're giving them a cake, they've given them a lot. It's a lot.
It's a very big cake. And I think this also ties into one of our other reader questions we have here from Spencer. And I say this because I think it goes to show just like how intertwined so many facets of state government are with the bourbon industry. And Spencer's question, they ask, why do you think challenges within the bourbon industry are treated so differently than most other industries? For example, if a coffee shop closes or even many coffee shops, there aren't automatically concerns that all cafes may be in trouble. Which I think is a good question, really. I mean, we've been here for like 40 minutes, chatting about like, why is this such a big deal, Janet? I think it kind of gets to that.
Yeah, I think it's partly because of the number of people the industry employs. And I don't have that number at my fingertip, but it's thousands and thousands. And you could argue, okay, but restaurants employ a lot of people too. Yes, they do. But unless, a whole chain goes out, like if we'll take Shoney's, for instance. Wasn't it Shoney's Big Boys that closed?
Oh, no. Janet, I know you didn't know this, but I love Shoney's. I'm a huge fan of Shoney's.
I'm sorry.
I think there's one left in the state. I believe it's in Louisville. I won't stay on Shoney's much longer. That's all.
So even as horrible as that was, it didn't have the impact that it would have if a distillery closes, a distillery that's been in operation. I think the reason that the ones that aren't in operation, why that's been such a big story, has been sort of the implications for the industry as a whole. Because, I can't say that closing, or closing the Garrett County Distillery cost a huge number of jobs, or not opening Luca Mariano. That didn't impact that many people in terms of employment. Certainly those individual cases, not more than like a restaurant that goes out of business. But, there were a lot of local businesses that helped them get built, sold them grain, were part of the architecture, the plumbing, the contractors who did all this. So there's a lot of people who go into building something new like that, and a lot of them have not been paid. In some cases, they're owed millions of dollars, and so that impact has a big trickle down effect, I guess is what I'm trying to say there.
Right. It's a little bit of because I think when people, and I don't fault anyone for thinking this when they think about bourbon, it's just like the experience, I think, for sort of just like a casual, even passerby, is just like, oh, well, I'll drink some bourbon, I'll get this bottle. When it's like there's massive infrastructure that goes into the production, the barreling itself is a huge industry, separate even from everything else. And so it sounds like, what you're saying, Janet. It's just like if one distillery closes or doesn't open or something happens, like, terms of jobs affected, maybe that's on par with like something like a restaurant, but like the build out is where things get kind of really hairy.
Yeah, and then the ripple effect. There's just a lot of ripple effects that come into it. Like you said, barrels. So they're not going to make any whiskey there. So they're not going to need any barrels. So that's not going to happen. Or they're not going to be buying any more corn. So that's not going to happen. That kind of thing. They're not going to need anyone to truck the corn or the barrels around. They're not going to need anyone to be filling bottles. They're not going to buy any glass for those bottles. They're not going to buy any labels for those bottles. They're not going to pay any tax revenue on any of it now because it's not happening.
Right. And I mean, again, like, I know that sometimes when I look at something like this, it's very easy to just be like, it's kind of like sort of similar to like when you go to the grocery store and you're like, oh, well, there are no apples here. And it's just like, well, that probably means that somewhere along this elaborate supply chain, something has prevented the apples from getting here. And it's sort of a similar comparison, I think, there. I do.
For you as a customer, you just say, "Oh, this is great. Okay, grapes. Well, bananas.
Yeah.
Not a big deal." But for the apple grower, it's a big deal. And what if you never go back? What if you say, I really like grapes. I don't really want to go back to apples.
Yeah. Okay, I want to allot us time for just, I think, two last questions here. One of which is, now that we've spent the prerequisite 45 minutes talking about everything that is wrong, of course, it's not all doom and gloom with bourbon here in Kentucky. I know, Janet, you just recently had a story, Heaven Hill, who just opened a new $200 million distillery in Bardstown, which was a very big homecoming for them. So what are some of the bright spots that we're seeing in the midst of all this?
Well, that is a huge one. So if you've been in Kentucky for a while, you may remember the River of Fire. This was the horrible fire that happened in 1996, I think, when I think lightning struck something at the Heaven Hill distillery campus in Bardstown, and they lost not only their distillery, but I think 7 rick houses. Just so much bourbon, and they couldn't put it out. It's famous. It's famous for causing like the fire tornado and everything. The footage of it is incredible. You can find it online if you go looking for it. And of course, we covered it with pictures as well. So they bought another distillery in Louisville, and they've used that's called the Bernheim Distillery. They've used that one forever, and it's still going strong, but it's not pretty. It's very industrial. It's great, makes great bourbon. And that one, they're keeping that one. That's not going away. But finally, after all these years, they've built a brand new one, and it is just sort of starting production. They will eventually get up to the same scale as the Bernheim facility. So some point in the next probably 5 to 10 years, maybe a little bit further out now, it will eventually double their capacity. Right now, they only have one still in, but they've done such a beautiful job. It is still a very industrial distillery, but it's lovely, and you can tour it. If you go to Heaven Hill, you can book a tour to see Heaven Hill Springs Distillery is what it's called. And so they've done such a great job of making it so that when they're ready, they just pop off the roof and they'll drop down the next column still, which is incredible to think about. These things are so big to just imagine a giant crane, lowering this huge still, which is, I think this one is like 60 inches. So basically in diameter, so basically, little about, I would basically fit right at the top of just about my height. And that's how big it is. It's so big. You couldn't put your arms around it.
Yeah.
And then one day they'll put in a third. So that's how much is going to be made there. So it was beautiful. It was a lovely day. Mayor of Bardstown was there, gave a key to the city. That was really nice. So that was a big bright spot recently. Let's see what else has happened. It's been a really nice one. I think I think the food thing is really kind of cool. You know, there are a lot more places to eat and at distilleries, and Buffalo Trace is going to have one now. They're going to have a restaurant on their campus, which if you've been to Buffalo Trace, beautiful, beautiful distillery. A lot of people tour it. It's lovely, and they're going to have now a cafe that you can get sandwiches and stuff at. That's going to be kind of fun.
Mm.
What else? What else is a bright spot that's happened in the near term that I think would be? And there's always new releases.
I was going to say, and you tried one not too long ago yourself, right? Was it the Weller?
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, I did get to try the Weller Millennium, which was, we get sent samples. This was not a sample I got sent. Samples to review. They want us to taste. They invited me and a couple of other journalists to come to Buffalo Trace to taste Millennium, which is a very special bourbon that I could never ever afford, and it was delicious. As I said in the headline, I was almost sorry because I will never get to taste it again. I'm sure of it because I'm never going to be able to afford it again. And one more, I went to I talked to there's another brand new distillery that I did not go to yet. It's in Jackson Purchase, which is why I haven't been there because I don't go to Jackson Purchase very often.
Yeah.
And Craig Beam is the master distiller there, formerly at Heaven Hill, and he has just launched a new bourbon, and it's phenomenal as well. So yeah, there's always new stuff coming out to try. Bourbon's not going away. It's just kind of sitting back on its heels at this moment.
Yeah. Well, I think to close this out, I do. Perhaps much to your chagrin, I have to go back to Canada right quick. And of course, you had this story not very long ago that was headlined, "Blame Canada?" ? The party's over for Kentucky bourbon, at least for now. And of course, this one was a bit of a retrospective on when these tariffs were being announced or being sort of considered, and our friends to the north decided, of course, that this boycott, which has been, I would say, rather successful, especially you've got Brown-Forman coming out and saying like, oh, our profits, our exports to Canada, profits are down 60%. And so a successful boycott, but many of our Canadian friends didn't like that. I think that they were being blamed, which I don't think you meant to lay the entire blame on the feet of Canada. But what do you say to our Canadian fans and readers that we apparently have so many of? I don't think we realized.
I didn't realize, and I guess I'm sorry that we ever put those words in the headline, but it did have a question mark, and I think that is an important point. However, I have communicated with many, many people from Canada who are very upset about that, and so many that, in fact, I wrote another story about their thoughts, and their thought basically is, don't blame us, blame President Trump. That he is the reason we're doing this, and they are just adamant that this is not about tariffs. This is not about economics at all. It is about what they see as a grave insult to their national pride, and it's kind of funny. Like, I don't think they have any ill will towards Kentucky, the same way that I don't think we have any ill will toward Canada. We're just sort of caught in the middle of this political tug of war.
Yes. And it's perhaps also a lesson in that sometimes when we put those little questions in headlines, it's to encourage you to find the answer and read on and see what it is. Yes, the Herald-Leader formally apologizes to the people of Canada. We know this was not your fault.
proud of their accomplishment, though. In terms, I mean, they feel like they've had an impact, and they're not sorry about that at all.
And they have.
I get that. Yeah, I get
that. Yeah, and they absolutely have. If anything, huge success story again for the people of Canada who have decided to boycott this on, rather principled grounds. So it, if anything, hey, they got us. They're winning. But that is all the time I will make you talk about that, Janet. I don't want you to get any more ill emails populating your inbox.
I will say for hate mail, it was the most polite hate mail I've gotten, I think. So everyone that communicated with me had very strong and firm opinions, but they were, for the most part, incredibly respectful, which I can appreciate.
Yes, and that is something that I think as journalists we don't get a lot of, is constructive hate mail, respectful and kind even. So another lesson to be learned from that. Well, Janet, thank you so much for your time here today, talking about what is happening with the bourbon industry here in Kentucky. And I think perhaps the main through line is that it's a rough patch right now. Things are looking rocky on some ends. But I think, as you said, Janet, just a couple minutes ago, like, it's not going anywhere. And I think, if anything, they're kind of seeing what's at play. They're adjusting, obviously, to try to capture a younger audience. And, they're seeing what works for them. And time will kind of tell how that bears out.
Yeah. I think it's going to be an interesting time for us. Bourbon drinkers are likely to see a lot more aged, older things in the shelves. Those would be something to look for. I think people would want that. People also have asked me a lot if prices are coming down. I wouldn't expect that so much, but I think there'll be a lot more interesting releases to look for.
All right. Well, that is something that we can all look forward to. Hopefully not as pricey as the Weller Millennium.
Thanks for reading. I mean, I really appreciate it that people take the time to read the stories.
Yes. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone, to those out there who are watching. Thank you for those who are reading. Again, I'm Andrew Henderson with the Lexington Herald-Leader. I've been joined today by Janet Patton, also of the Herald-Leader, also our bourbon reporter. So thank you all so much. And you can find more over at Kentucky.com.